On today's show, the Houston Rockets 2024-2025 NBA schedule has been released. What are the major schedule takeaways? We're going to unpack it all on today's Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Mondays. Be sure to follow along wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Rockets. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Now, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more this summer because FanDuel's hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That means there's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And as always, thank you so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on your way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym. Thank you for being an everydayer. Joining us now is your weekly co-host, the Podfather himself, Rockets Wire editor and host of the Logger Line podcast, Ben DuBose. You can track down on Twitter at Ben DuBose, here because it is the magical time of year where we are in the dog days of the NBA offseason, and the basketball gods have blessed us with the Houston Rockets schedule release. So we get to sit here and pour over all 82, well, not all 82 games of action, all 80 games of action, since there are the two little games missing in there, depending on how things work out in the NBA Cup group play stage for the Houston Rockets.
And there's going to be 3 games added because they're making it all the way to the championship and winning that Cup championship.
There we go. We like that mentality, Ben. We're manifesting it here on the episode. I do have to preface really quickly at the jump. I am so incredibly sick, guys. I'm sorry if I sound nasally. I'm sorry if I cough or get, sound sick throughout the episode. This is my flu game right here.
Yes.
We're getting this done, though, because we're talking about the schedule. And thankfully for the Rockets, Ben, a couple notes right off the top. They get to play at home to start the season for the first time all the way back since 2019.
Yep. And I would note that the start to the schedule, so these first 11 games, you have only 3 against bona fide contenders, that being the Mavs, the Thunder, and the Knicks. Other than that, you're looking at 8 teams that are either likely non-playoff teams or fringe at best. So it's a really good opportunity. Of your first 18 games, 11 are at home, including that opener against the Hornets on the 23rd and then the Grizzlies on the 25th. So it's very manageable. And I would argue that the Rockets are actually a team that should be stronger than a lot of others at the start of the season because there is so much continuity. I know we think of the Rockets as being younger, but there's not a coaching change. Pretty much the entire rotation is back. The only newcomer to the rotation, well, that we know is going to be in the rotation, is Steven Adams, and he's a 31-year-old professional who knows what he's doing. Small chance of Reed Shepherd, I guess. But the point is, the vast majority of your rotation minutes day one are going to be guys who were with you last year in the same system with the same coach.
A lot of
I would say
here.
It's a team, the Rockets, that should be more ready out of the chute than most around the NBA. And so you combine that with a weaker schedule, and I think it sets up well for the Rockets to start fast. And I think it's important for this team in particular to do so because, look, we're not expecting the Rockets to contend for a championship this season, barring like a major trade at the deadline or something crazy. This is still about development. And so when we're talking about development, when we're talking about learning more information, what you want is for games to matter. So yes, I understand that the schedule does get more difficult on especially the last couple of months. I'm sure we'll talk about that as the episode progresses. But just to be able to hopefully get off to a fast start, I think that's really meaningful because if the Rockets have a winning record for a lot of this season, then you ensure that you're going to be playing meaningful games for most or hopefully all of this season. And ultimately, that's the most important thing in a season that's more about development than it truly is trying to contend.
And look, the easy start to the schedule is important because schedule momentum is very much a real thing. Just like momentum in a given basketball game, if you hit the ground running and come out the gate and you have a strong start, strong month and a half, 2 months, whatever, to start the year, you have all the good vibes around the team. Players are feeling good about themselves. Whereas if you are thrown into the pool right from the jump and you struggle out the gate, you lose a bunch of games, then that can be something that kind of weighs on you as the season progresses. Because then even when you do get to the easier part of the schedule down the line, you've already been just struggling for so much of the schedule. It's hard to kind of dig yourself out of that muck, so to speak. So I do really like the easy schedule to start for the Houston Rockets is an absolute plus. We're going to definitely talk about how brutal the schedule gets a little bit further down the line. We're going to save that for segment 2. But Ben, I put it out there. No, go ahead.
I was just going to add that, especially for this team, when you have several of your core players headed into very important years with their career trajectories. Think Jalen Green, Alperen, Sengun going into year 4, Jabari Smith Jr., Tari, Eason going into year 3. When you have a lot of young players that are at key pivot points in their careers potentially, we know the mental side of the game is very important in terms of them taking the next step potentially. So I think having them in the right frame of mind, beyond just the team as a whole trying to win more games, get into postseason play, and so on and so forth, for those young guys that are getting to potentially big time leap years, then allowing them to start on the right foot and be in the right frame of mind, I think it's important for them individually as well.
Yeah, 100%. Excellent point there. And I do think that, again, you start taking a look at those first, we'll narrow it down. I know you mentioned the first 11 games, but we'll just take a look at the first, those first 10 for sake of this little thought exercise. I put it out there on social media. What are your record predictions for the first 10 games? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the YouTube comments. So if you're watching us on YouTube, drive by, come into the comments section, put your record prediction for the first 10 games. I'll put a little template in the comments so you can just copy paste it. Ben, give me your thoughts on the first 10 games. Where do you think the Rockets stand record wise after 10?
I'm going to say 6-4. I could see a slightly more bullish scenario than that, but look, you do have 3 legitimately difficult games in there between the Mavericks, the Thunder, and the Knicks, 2 of those on the road, I believe. And then the ones you play against the Spurs, the 2 and 3 nights in San Antonio on the 26th and 28th of October, those aren't going to be easy, even if it's a team that you feel like you're better than on paper, playing on the road, the I-10 rivalry, everything that comes with that. So when you look at 3 games that I think you'll be decided underdogs against, those being the Mavericks, the Thunder, the Knicks, and then having a few other road games in there, the 3 against the Spurs, we know it's tough to beat the same team repeatedly in a span of basically 10 days. So I'm going to say that they lose 2 of those 3 games that they're going to be clear underdogs in. They lose 1 to the Spurs and then drop 1 other somewhere else along the way.
I like the 6-4 prediction. I went 6-4 last year. Okay. I think I'm going to be a little more bullish. I'm going to go 7-3.
Ooh, I like it.
I think they're going to take, surprisingly, maybe take one more of those games against the true contenders. And again, I think we talk about kind of the schedule momentum, having the easy start to the schedule. As long as they're taking care of business against the bad teams that they're facing, I will say with the caveat, the one kind of dark horse team in there that we're not even looking at as like true contenders. We got to remember the Grizzlies were the 2 seed just a couple seasons ago with a healthy Ja Morant. So even though they're coming off of a down season and all that stuff, and there are some question marks about that team, if the Grizzlies are healthy and if they come out the gate strong and start playing the way they were 2 seasons ago when they were the second best team in the Western Conference, that could very easily be another juggernaut to deal with out West.
The one that I thought you were going to mention is that Golden State game on the 2nd of November, because I think you actually have to go back to the 2019 playoffs, game 3 and game 4, to find a Rockets victory at Toyota Center against the Warriors. I could be wrong on that, but it's been a really long time. We know it felt like last season's schedule was sort of bookended by the Warriors because you lost that game. I think it was the 3rd of the season. So the vibes were bad, 0-3 start when we were so optimistic going in. And then, even though it wasn't the season ender, it felt like that loss to the Warriors in early April was effectively the postseason ender because it basically eliminated the Rockets from play-in contention, not mathematically, but for practical purposes, it did. So it's been a really long time. We're talking 5+ years, I believe, since the Rockets have actually beaten Steph Curry at Toyota Center. I know it's not the same Warriors. They're getting older. There's no Klay Thompson, yada, yada. But until the Rockets beat Steph Curry at Toyota Center, and Steph coming off, just an incredible Olympic run, then I think it's natural to have a little bit of skepticism about that.
That could be another trap game as well. But coming up, we want to get into the other half of the Rockets schedule. We'll talk about how things heat up in the back half of the season for the Rockets, as well as we're going to take a look at some of the best games, get into some of the NBA Cup group play action expectations for the Rockets there as well. We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Look, I love sports. I love them so much. I never really want them to stop. But when you got playoffs winding down and the Olympics are now over and the sports maybe they're not sports in the way you want them to, right? Look, FanDuel lets keep the sports going whenever you want. All you have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime that you're in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That means there's something for everyone every day all summer long. Right now, you can take a look at the outright betting favorites to win the NBA Cup this upcoming season. The Boston Celtics plus 450 to win the Emirates NBA Cup. That's the new name that they're giving it this year. Right behind them, the OKC Thunder at plus 750 and the Milwaukee Bucks at plus 850. So for all those odds and so much more, head on over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Now, Ben, the good news for the Rockets, right, is the schedule starts off relatively easy, right? There are some early, contenders in the mix there, as we talked about in segment one. But for the most part, the Rockets have a pretty easy go of things early on. They play the first 11 of their first 18 games, I should say, are played at home. Then they go on a little bit of a road trip, at the end of November, beginning of December kind of thing. They have a homestand at the end of December, which is always really nice. But things start to get a little murky in the back half of the schedule for the Rockets specifically. I will say they are currently ranked via Tankathon.com has them ranked as the third toughest strength of schedule in the NBA landscape. I believe they were third toughest last year as well. I don't know if that's just a weird coincidence or what, but the only teams with a tougher schedule right out of the gate than the Houston Rockets are the Utah Jazz and the Portland Trail Blazers.
Yeah, and it's a very unique schedule in that the longest road trip of the entire year is 4 games, which is really short. Yet they have 16 back-to-backs this year, which I think is the most in the NBA. If it's not the most, it's second most. And they have 7 of those on the road. So I think 7 2-road game back-to-backs, 4 2 home game back-to-backs, and then the other 5 are split. So that may as well be 2 road games because you've got the air travel in between, which is what makes it so difficult. So it depends on how you look at it. The good news for the Rockets, that you can argue that because this roster is so deep in terms of rotation players potentially, that the Rockets could withstand back-to-backs more than any other team. But at the same time, look, when you're first or number 2 in the league in back-to-backs, that's definitely difficult when you look at the metrics and whatnot. And I think you just have to hope that it's somewhat offset by the fact that, again, they do have more depth than a lot of teams, and also they don't have any cumulatively really long road trips, i.e., 6, 7 in a row. So if there are these back-to-backs, it's sort of quick hitting, and then they're back at home. And then, you look at the second half of the year, it's really interesting. Like they have a stretch from, I want to say, early January to early February where they play 13 of 17, I believe it is, on the road. Then they play 13 of 17 at home. So even though there's not these super long, road trips or homestands, I think the longest homestand is 5 games right around the holidays. They've got the Timberwolves, Heat, Mavericks, Lakers, and Celtics all right after Christmas. So that's going to be, in terms of standout games at Toyota Center, I think that's going to be the time of year that's really going to be interesting for us in the media, as fans, whatever it may be. But it's also sort of a disjointed schedule in that it feels like they're home for the most part for long stretches, on the road. So maybe it helps them get into rhythm a little bit. One other thing I think we should note is that the teams, they play only 3 times. So you look at the scheduling formula. So you play every team in the East twice a year. You play most teams in the West 4 times a year, 2 at home, 2 on the road. But to get to 82 games, there's some you play only 3. As of now, that's the Lakers, Nuggets, Kings, Suns, Jazz, and Trailblazers, with the asterisk on that being that if you don't advance to the quarterfinals of the NBA Cup, you're going to have 2 games added against teams most likely from that grouping. So you'll get to 4. And I'm sure the Rockets right now, they only host the Lakers once in Houston. I'm sure the business side would love to get a second Lakers game. Maybe that's what ends up happening in the second week of December if the Rockets and Lakers don't advance to the quarterfinals of the Cup. But come on, they're both advancing. Lakers are reigning champions, and the Rockets are going to be the 2024 Cup champions. Look, as far as the schedule, I just think that the other thing to consider with the difficult second half of the year is that by the time you get to March and April, a lot of the more true contenders are sort of pulling back on the throttle a little bit to make sure their guys are ready for the playoffs. So the Rockets might benefit from that. That's sort of the one silver lining. I mentioned earlier that if you get off to a fast start, you're in contention throughout the year. That's good for development. Beyond that, while the back half, and especially the last 6 to 8 weeks, is really difficult after the All-Star break, at the same time, some of these more veteran-laden contenders, by the time you get to mid-March and beyond, some of these guys aren't going to be going all out because they're going to be trying to conserve for the postseason. And, I'll give an example. Beyond just the last few weeks, the season finale is against the Denver Nuggets. I feel pretty confident that Nikola Jokic and Jamal Murray, unless the Nuggets have a ton to gain from that, they're probably not going to play much, if any, assuming the Nuggets have locked up their playoff seed, because they're guys that have a lot of mileage on them, and the playoffs are going to be starting in a few days. So that's one thing to sort of keep in mind. If your schedule is backloaded, you might benefit from some of those contenders pulling back a little bit towards the final month or so of the season.
Yeah, and we even talked about the fact, they only play Denver 3 times, at least right now as it stands. Or no, I apologize. Right, Denver's one of the 3 teams.
Yeah, they're one of those.
There we go. They have another matchup with the Nuggets on March 23rd, right? And that's around mid-March is where you start getting that picture of like the playoff standings and where things are, kind of lining up. And if the Nuggets are firmly rooted into whatever spot they're going to be in, if they're okay, right, if they're not pushing, pedal to the metal about how trying to win these games, then that could be really beneficial to the Rockets. The flip side, though, Ben, when I'm looking at the schedule, the teams that stand out on that final stretch of games for the Rockets, the Lakers, the Clippers, the Warriors, a lot of teams that could be in there. Lakers twice, actually, they're the tail end of things. Teams that are very much likely going to be in the mix for those play-in tournament spots out west. So while I do agree that I think teams like the Nuggets, who are probably, clearly head and shoulders, like top 4 guaranteed team in the Western Conference, whatever, those teams are probably going to be locked and set into whatever they've got going on and are going to be looking to rest their guys ahead of the postseason. I think the Rockets do, unfortunately, have a few matchups against some of those kind of on the bubble teams at the very end of the schedule, where maybe the Rockets are a little bit further ahead of the pecking order. Maybe they're hovering around that 6, 7, 8 seed range, and they're good. They're not worried about getting bounced out of the play-in tournament. But the Lakers, Clippers, and Warriors could very well be fighting for their play-in lives at that point. Just like we saw this past season, the Rockets and Warriors were in a dead race to try and make it to the play-in tournament, and then Rockets had their little losing streak. Warriors peeled off a bunch of wins, and then that kind of became that with the Warriors win against the Rockets late in the season. The other note that I have, sorry, go ahead, and then I want to bring up one other note.
Yeah, I was going to say it feels like the NBA sort of anticipates those games being meaningful, because if you look at the Rockets' national TV breakdown, so they have 11 games this year, 8 on NBA TV, 2 on TNT, 1 on ESPN. Now, obviously, if the Rockets are really good, they can add more games at a later date because those aren't set in stone. But as of now, you've got 11, which is a jump from last year. I know a big chunk of those are NBA TV, but still, it does show that the NBA expects the Rockets to be a better team as opposed to this time last year when I think they just had 3 or 4, and I think most of those were NBA TV. But of those 8 NBA TV, 4 are in the final 2 weeks of the season, and that stretch you're talking about against the Lakers, the Suns, the Clippers, that group. And so I think the NBA on paper is looking at that and saying, hey, these are games that have a good chance of being relevant for the postseason push, be it the playoffs or the play-in. So it won't be easy. You're right about that. But at the same time, it does indicate that, hey, the expectations are for the Rockets to be a much more relevant team. And at the end of the day, that's step 1 for this group.
I had one more note that I want to get to about another significant stretch of the schedule and how it could impact the Rockets. We want to talk about that, as well as getting into some of our NBA Cup group play predictions. Take a look at the teams the Rockets are set to face during the group play stage before they get to the knockout round of the tournament. We're going to get there in just one moment. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, Ben, so there's one other significant stretch that I think matters when we look at this season, when we kind of try and, zoom out and take a full look at the 82-game slate. And we talked about, kind of the breakdown, that weird stretch where they play 13 of 17 on the road, then they're back 13 of 17 at home. That first stretch, that 13 of 17 on the road, that happens to be from, about early January until early February. There's a stretch in there where that directly coincides with the NBA trade deadline, which is going to be February 6th. So Thursday, February 6th. I do think that is really important to note. I broke it down a little bit differently. There's basically the 15 games leading up to the NBA trade deadline for the Rockets. 11 of those 15 are all on the road. That is a really tough kind of stretch, a tough gauntlet to have to play through, especially leading into the point where the arguably most pivotal point of your NBA season, where you have to decide, are we bought in on this guy? Do we trade a guy who's been struggling? Do we make, what major changes could this team be looking to make around the trade deadline, right? If they are really dominant in that stretch, if they look really good, then maybe that's enough, of a confidence boost to make a move to help them even further, right? Like, adding a veteran piece to the roster or something like that. Or conversely, if they're really struggling in that stretch, if XYZ player starts looking really bad or has been struggling for a month or two leading into that stretch, that could be kind of the death knell, the death sentence for a certain guy, a guy, and we might not get another untradeable tour going into that stretch, because it's kind of a brutal little 15-game window.
Yeah, absolutely. And we should also note that the start to the year being a little bit soft, I think that plays into it as well, because when you talk to folks inside the building at Toyota Center, what you hear more than anything else about why they sort of stood pat this offseason, other than the addition of Reed Shepherd, is they want to get more information before they make any major decisions in terms of who's a long-term piece, who's not. There's still so much variance with these young guys in particular that rather than force a decision now, they want to make sure that they have as much information as possible before they make a more definitive call on any of these young prospects. Well, if you can't take advantage of this start to the season, we've spent a lot of this pod talking about the bullish case for it, which is that, hey, you get off to a good start, the vibes are great, helps the development. Well, let's look at the bear case. If it doesn't go well for this team, despite having a relatively friendly start to the year, a lot of home games, and then you go into that stretch that's very heavy on the road leading into the trade deadline, yeah, that could force some hard decisions to be made in early February, especially if we're talking about guys like, obviously, Jalen Green, Alperen, Sengun, where if there's no extension this offseason, and I think we both anticipate that there won't be, look, if they're going to go into restricted free agency and there's some uncertainty over how much you're willing to give one or both of those guys, then yeah, that could lead to some very hard conversations being had as you lead up to the February trade deadline if the season isn't going up to your expectations. I would add even Fred VanVleet. Look, if you think you're going to be very aggressive in the 2025 free agency market, we've talked about the potential of turning down that team option and the Rockets having up to max cap room. Look, if the season isn't going the way you expect, there's a world where you could potentially trade Fred under the logic of, look, if we think we're going to turn down the option anyway and lose him for cap space, and we don't really have realistic playoff ambitions ourselves, could we trade Fred for a couple of expiring contracts and draft equity, basically keeping the financial flexibility, but getting a little bit of, draft equity on top of it to boost the war chest under the logic of, look, if we're not going to win big this season anyway, maybe it makes sense to trade Fred somewhere that he could win now. And with us, if we expect to lose him in the offseason anyway, because we want to be more aggressive in free agency, again, not saying that's my expectation, but if the season is going poorly, then that's the type of conversation you might have to have as you get closer to that February 2025 trade deadline. And so if you don't start well with a relatively friendly schedule, and then you're picking up losses in those weeks leading up to the deadline, and you look at how difficult the close is that we just talked about, it'd be pretty tough to say, in my opinion, yeah, it's going poorly, but we think it's going to turn around if we just wait a little bit longer. No, if it's bad come early February, it's probably bad. And so that's going to influence the decisions you make at that trade deadline.
Well, the good news is Air Corgi has predicted the Rockets to go 82-0. So none of that's happening. The Rockets are going 82-0. They're winning the NBA Cup. They're winning the NBA championship. It's all happening. No,
83-0 if they win the NBA Cup.
83-0. No, but speaking about the NBA Cup, let's take a look at that really quick. We'll take a look at the group play stage for the Houston Rockets. We found this out a while back. I think it was during Summer League when it was announced who the Rockets would be. We paired with in their group play, stage. So they've got just a quick refresher here. They're paired up with the LA Clippers, the Portland Trailblazers, the Minnesota Timberwolves, and the Sacramento Kings. Of all four of these opponents, Ben, the fireworks are going to be flying when they play the LA Clippers. With obviously, it's always a lot of fun to go back up against James Harden whenever he's up against the Houston Rockets, second greatest player in franchise history. And then there's the added little spark plug of Kevin Porter Jr. making his NBA return. The Clippers
tribute video. I'm kidding.
Oh my goodness. No. So look, that of all these matchups, that is the one in NBA tournament play, which I believe they play for their Clippers Rockets tournament game. That's going to be in Toyota Center. That is going to be arguably one of the most highly anticipated games on the entire schedule, I think, for me, just seeing how those two teams compete with one another, because there are some underlying storylines there on both sides.
Well, and one of the things that the NBA is sort of evolving into with its schedule is to something closer to baseball for travel reasons, where you oftentimes have teams playing 2 consecutive games in the same arena. Like the first week of the year, we mentioned the Rockets having 2 in San Antonio in 3 nights. You look at the start of Cup play, they've got a Clippers game at Toyota Center on Wednesday the 13th that is not part of the Cup. And then the 15th, they play the Clippers again at Toyota Center. It is part of the Cup. And then next weekend, they play the Blazers Friday at Toyota Center. That is part of Cup play. Then they run it back on Saturday, not part of Cup play. So you're seeing more of these sort of back-to-backs or 2 consecutive games against the same opponent, which has its own implications in terms of being able to scheme a little bit more to dial up what you're doing for one specific team like you would in the playoffs, as opposed to normally when you're changing opponents 3-4 times a week. Then there's only so much prep you can put into one team before you have to move on to whatever's next on the schedule. So that could have some implications as well. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that Clippers opener of Cup play, certainly the Harden and KPJ angles. But beyond that, I think that's really the swing game, because look, the second game against Portland, you're going to be a heavy favorite at home. If you can get that first game against the Clippers, the odds are you're looking at a 2-0 start to group stage and Cup play. And if you're 2-0, then you should have a chance going into those last 2 games. Now, you'll be a decided underdog at Minnesota after Thanksgiving, but I actually do like the finale of Cup play, or of group stage Cup play, at Sacramento. I think the Kings are a team that the Rockets match up very well against. I like Sengun against Sabonis. I also like what Jalen Green can do against teams that don't really have a traditional rim protecting big. We saw before Sengun got hurt in Sacramento, I thought that was one of the most encouraging Rockets games of last season, where they went in and took care of business against the Kings on the road, tough place to play, and they were by far the better team for most of that game. That was early on in the winning streak, and again, that was with Sengun. Sengun just got hurt in the final seconds of that win. So I think even though the Kings are a good team on paper, I think the Rockets match up well with them. I think they should beat the Trailblazers no matter what. And so if you can get that Clippers opener, then I think the odds are good that you can go 3-1 through these Cup games. And if that doesn't win your group, it should at least give you an opportunity to be in the mix for that wild card spot and potentially get to the quarterfinals.
Yeah, they were 3-0 against Sacramento last season. Now it's worth reminding
2 without De'Aaron Fox.
2 without De'Aaron Fox, but they were still far and away the better team up until the Alperen Sengun injury, and even still being able to close out that game where Sengun ultimately did get injured, and the Kings were at full strength in that game. So I do think that's a team that they match up incredibly well with. The Timberwolves, that's going to be the tough one, because they were 0-3 against the T-Wolves last season. The T-Wolves clearly one of the most dominant teams in the associations, really, just up and down. I don't think they match up well with the Timberwolves either, unfortunately. The double bigs, all that stuff. It's a hard matchup for the Rockets to find a way to be effective in. But we'll see. And then the only wrinkle with Sacramento, they added DeMar DeRozan, right? So what does that do for their team this season? Having 2 of the most clutch players in the entire game in De'Aaron Fox and DeMar DeRozan. We'll see how that impacts things. But
Dillon's going to get DeMar DeRozan ejected again, so you don't have to worry about that.
There we go. I'm here for it. The group play stuff is going to be fantastic. Rockets have a great slate of games there. We want to know, which games are you most looking forward to on the Rockets schedule? What are your thoughts about the Houston Rockets schedule for this upcoming season? Let us know in the YouTube comments. Ben, you know the drill. Let everybody know where they can track you down at.
Yep. Ben DuBose on Twitter, the Rockets Wire, the Logger Line on the same, rocketswire.usatoday.com for all your daily Houston Rockets news coverage. And as far as final predictions, I'll be optimistic. 45-37. They should be better than last year. Metrics indicated they were fairly unlucky at 41-41. So I'm going to say 45-37, and Rockets actually sneak into the play-in.
46. I'm going 46 wins. That's my final prediction. That's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Rockets. As always, thank you so much for checking out the show. If you haven't done so yet, please consider subscribing wherever you listen to your podcasts, or on YouTube, just search Locked On Rockets. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, a 5-star review helps us out a ton. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. We look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.